There are around 360 million people who speak English as their first language, as their mother tongue, and about 1.5 billion people who speak English around the world. There are more people who speak English as an additional language than who speak English as a first language. So why in the world would we think that English can only belong to the Queen of England? What makes a language belong to you? Would you like to make English a part of your heart and your soul so that when you speak it, it really feels like you? You're going to have to learn how to do two very important things. Number one, completely change your mindset. And number two, stop listening to everyone, maybe even your English teacher. Very often, English teachers and English learners look at this as being very black and white. And it's actually not black and white at all. English teachers or English learners might say something like, a language belongs to you if you are born speaking that language. I think it's actually a lot more complicated than that. Let's start with some personal examples from my life. My son is 3 years old. He's learning English at home with me and also French at home with his dad. His dad is a native French speaker. His English is probably stronger than his French, at least at this point, in this moment, just because we live in an English-speaking environment, and so he hears English more often than he does French. So when we go to visit a French region or a French country, it's possible that my son makes some mistakes when he's speaking French. One, because he's only 3 years old, but also because he just isn't exposed to French as much as English. And it's possible that, especially as my son grows older, that French speakers, other French speakers, might make certain judgments about his French because of the mistakes that he makes. And they might even think that French is not his language because he's not speaking it perfectly. Even though, in my opinion, French is absolutely his language, and it always will be. It's the language or one of the languages that he's been hearing since the day he was born. Chances are you don't have a heritage link to English or a historical link to English. So can you claim English as your language? Well, I think you know what I'm going to say. As another personal example, my husband, who is a scientist, a researcher, a university lecturer, he does many smart academic things in the English language. Even though it's not his first language, he actually didn't really learn English until he was an adult. He uses words that are sometimes too advanced for native English speakers to understand. He has a much better understanding of grammar than most native English speakers do. And yet, there will always be people who hear him speak and think that English does not belong to him. He will never meet the standards that some people have in their minds of who gets to own English, who gets to claim English, play with it, be creative with it. My husband told me once that sometimes he thinks of a joke, a play on words, a pun in English, but he stops himself from saying the joke out loud because he thinks maybe these people will think that I just don't speak English well and they won't understand that I'm telling a joke. And that story, that little anecdote, makes me sad to hear because I don't think that only native speakers should be allowed to be creative with English. I think it's also interesting to point out that even though sometimes a non-native English speaker, such as my husband, might have a higher level of vocabulary or a better understanding of grammar than a native speaker, his mistakes are still judged a lot more harshly than we would judge a native speaker of English, which is interesting. And I'm actually reading this book right now called The Language Game by a couple of linguists, I think. And I thought it was really interesting. They point out that adult English speakers make a mistake on average about every 7 minutes. Every 7 minutes, adult native English speakers make a mistake while they're talking. And this might seem a little bit surprising to you, but I've noticed for myself when I'm filming these videos, because sometimes I feel a little bit nervous filming a video in front of the camera, that I often make little mistakes when I'm speaking. I usually edit them out because I don't want to put my mistakes on the internet, but native speakers make mistakes all the time. And they even say here that although our speech is generally fluent, it is by no means faultless. As with any other skill, all of us continually make mistakes, no matter whether we're native speakers or not. As listeners, we are trying to understand the other person. We're usually paying attention to what they're saying, and we're not expecting mistakes from native speakers. And so sometimes, as a listener, we don't notice the mistakes. But they happen on average every 7 minutes, according to this book. Everybody makes mistakes, but of course, non-native English speakers are judged more harshly for their mistakes. I'm going to read you a little passage, and I want you to tell me what you think. Already, Mr. Smith said that there are millions of people around the world who claim English as their first language, but who cannot understand each other. One English teacher in India, for example, another in the Philippines, and a third in Nigeria. According to Mr. Smith, linguists believe that every dialect of the English language is equally valid. One of the things about World English is that English now belongs to whoever uses it, not just to native English speakers. And that is a little passage from this book, New Ways in Teaching Connected Speech, by James Dean Brown. English is a world language, you guys. It doesn't belong to just one country. It does not have just one set of rules. If you want English to be your language, take it. You can have it. Claim it. You don't need anyone's permission, including your teachers. You don't need my permission. It does not belong only to English-speaking babies. This is similar to confidence in that nobody can give you confidence. Confidence has to come from within yourself. If you're always relying on outside forces, on other people to validate your confidence, there are going to be times when you feel really, really bad. Don't let anyone keep it from you. Don't let other people's opinions make you feel like English isn't for you or isn't yours. Now, every time I talk about something like this, there are people who say, you can't just speak English any way you want. There are rules. Yes, of course. Of course there are rules. There are things to learn. There are agreed upon ways of communicating that we all need to learn. Yes, of course. But as you're learning, you can also claim the language for your own. Did you know that I don't know everything about English? There are many, many things that I still need to learn about my own language and that I will be learning until I die because there's just so much to learn. I don't know everything, but I still claim English as my language. You can be and you can be becoming at the same time. Okay, I think I'm getting a little bit too philosophical here, you guys. To learn more about your identity as an English speaker, I suggest you listen to this very beautiful and talented actress in this video right here. I'll see you next time, guys.